and welcome to another fabulous episode of Thyroid Refresh TV, a podcast dedicated to helping you live a thyroid healthy lifestyle. We're so glad to be back with you again. I'm Dana Bowman.
And I'm Ginny Maher, and we are the dynamic duo behind Thyroid Refresh and Thyroid 30. And we're so thrilled to be here today with Dr. Debbie Rice to talk about Dutch testing for hormones. So welcome, Dr. Debbie. Thanks so much for joining us.
Hello, and thank you for having me. I'm very excited to be here.
Before we dive in, we always want to give a little background. Debbie Rice, Dr. Rice is a naturopathic doctor who focuses care on pediatric health, hormone health, thyroid health, and adrenal health. She's had experience working with communities in need, both in the United States and internationally. Her training has been primarily in women's health, pediatric care, hormone therapy, and hormone function, as well as complementary adjunct care. Dr. Rice utilizes multiple modalities, including diet and lifestyle, botanical medicine, and conventional approaches that meet the patient where they're at in their health journey. Dr. Rice's passions include activism for access to healthcare, yoga, and exploring nature. So,
that's awesome. Well, we're really excited to learn more about the Dutch test today because, you know, in interviewing and collaborating with so many amazing thyroid experts, we hear about Dutch testing a lot. And the Dutch test is revered by integrative, functional, and naturopathic practitioners as the best way to get a complete hormonal picture. So I know I'm really excited to learn more about Dutch testing because I'm 43, I'm feeling some hormonal tremors starting to happen. And, you know, much as I'd like to, I haven't had a Dutch test yet. And I don't think you have either, right, Dana?
Nope,
not
but yet.
We both would like to. We were saying it's on our wish list. So we're always excited to share new and different ways our audience can learn more about their bodies. What is the testing that's available to us? So, and hormones is a big topic for this audience. So let's dive in, Dr. Debbie. Can we just start with what is Dutch testing? What does Dutch stand for? How does it work? What's the rundown?
Yeah. So the Dutch test so our niche with Dutch testing is sex hormones and adrenal hormones. And Dutch test stands for dried urine testing for comprehensive hormones. And so it's, you have these little strips that you pee on throughout the day. And then once you pee on them, you just let them dry, which is why it ends up being a dried urine test. And what this evaluates is your overall levels of estrogen, progesterone, testosterone, DHEA, and cortisol. And we don't just look at the level, right? So it's not just your estrogen, it's also what your estrogen does throughout your body. It's not just your testosterone, it's how your body uses your testosterone. And the bigger part of like what your body does with things is also cortisol. So cortisol in and of itself is very complex, but the Dutch test looks at how much cortisol is your body making, as well as how much is your body using, because there's a difference, right? Your body has to figure out what it needs to make to deal with stress and then how your body's going to use it throughout the day. And we expect there to be specific patterns when we're looking at cortisol function. And we're also looking at that with the Dutch test. So it's very specific to sex hormones and adrenal hormones. And when we look at hormones in general, and I call all of these the Goldilocks hormones. So when we're looking at any of the endocrine organs, so we're thinking thyroid, insulin, sex hormones, cortisol, I call it the triangle of love because they all work together, right? So we have, your thyroid here, we have your adrenals here, and we have your sex hormones here, and they all work together. In the middle of that little pyramid, in the middle of that triangle is your blood sugar and insulin and all of that. So they all influence each other. And that's why I say like they have to be in those Goldilocks ranges, right? If it's too high, somebody's not happy. If it's too low, somebody's not happy, and they're all communicating with each other. So that's where we look at the adrenal function with your sex hormones. And even though we don't test thyroid, because thyroid is actually really best tested in blood or serum, it's a wonderful complement to thyroid and looking at the overall effect of those hormones as well.
Yeah, that was a question I had, was what makes urine the ideal way to look at these hormones?
Yeah, and that's a great question. So previously, you know, like salivary testing was the big thing that when I went to school, it was all about salivary testing. And salivary testing is still really great for cortisol because it looks at the free hormone throughout the day. But with the urinary testing, we also get that picture of the free cortisol throughout the day, which is what we want. We want what is free and available. We get that same picture with the sex hormones as well, but because it's urine, we also get all of what are called the metabolites. And that's where we dive into, okay, here's your estrogen, but then what does your estrogen do? Those metabolites let us know what's happening with the rest of testosterone, the rest of cortisol, the rest of progesterone. So because you could simply go and say like, hey, I want to know what my estrogen level is. You could get a blood draw of your estrogen, and that's still a great representation of what that estrogen level is. So we'll say estradiol, which is our main estrogen for cycling females, but we don't get to see what the estradiol does in the body. And so I think that can make a big difference when we're looking at how your body detoxes or uses your hormones, because that can influence how you feel. Mm-hmm. Like, how does your body express that estrogen? How does your body express that testosterone? Same with your cortisol too.
Mm-hmm. That makes so much sense. Yeah. Thanks for clarifying that. It's like you want to see how all these friends are getting along on the playground together.
Yes, exactly. Because they all influence each other. Even, you know, a little bit can influence a lot. Yeah. So yeah, I think it makes a big difference. And I know with the Dutch testing, so there are usually 4 samples that we collect throughout the day. And actually it ends up being a collection that you start at dinner time. And so you take there are these little cards that you can pee on directly, or you can pee in a cup and dip it, whichever you feel most comfortable with. But everybody pees. So it's like, okay, well, you know, it's not difficult to do. So you pee on these little cards one time around dinner time, one time around bedtime. If you have that person that always wakes up in the middle of the night, you know, that person that comes in and says, I am up every night at 3:30, right? So when you wake up, pee on the little strip, then we'll be able to see what your cortisol level is there. And then as soon as you wake up for your day, and then 2 hours later. So we're getting this picture of what's happening at nighttime, overnight, as well as what happens in the morning, because we're really also wanting to look at cortisol is what we call a circadian rhythm hormone, which means it's based on your sleep wake cycle. And cortisol is supposed to start, you know, going right before you wake up so it can get you up and ready for your day, right? So it's going to be like, you're like, hey, good morning, we're ready for the day. And then it calms down through the rest of the day so that you can sleep at night, and then melatonin takes over. So cortisol is your daytime hormone. Melatonin is your nighttime hormone. And what we're looking for is that pattern nice, healthy, good, robust? Like, are you having a really nice cortisol response? And then does your cortisol calm down so you can sleep at night? So
it sounds so complex and so valuable too. I'm like, I want this. I'm going to put this on my Christmas list, you know. Yes. Can we talk about cost? Because I know that's something a lot of us need to wrap our minds around when we're deciding whether or not this is right for us.
Yeah. So, and I will say, when you do what's called the Dutch Complete, which is our flagship test, you are getting all of your sex hormones with those metabolites, right? Like what they're doing, your cortisol production, what your cortisol is doing. And we do have a little smattering of organic acids in there. What that means is we're looking at some metabolites for your B12 levels, your B6 levels, your melatonin, some dopamine and epinephrine, norepinephrine metabolites. So all of those correlate. We realized when we started out, we were doing just the sex hormones and the adrenals. And we would always say, well, it might not be a bad idea to check your B12. It might not be a bad idea to check, your dopamine, norepi. And we were like, we should just add it on there because we're always asking people to check it. So we do also have that. Another component of that is your oxidative stress. When we look at oxidative stress, this is how much damage your DNA is getting. And so it's not uncommon to have oxidative stress just as you age, right? Like just because we have exposure to different environmental things, but that oxidative stress also lets us know how much do we also need to support our body with regard to inflammation, environmental influence, and all of that. So that is included in that Dutch Complete test. And that Dutch Complete test is $250. So there are different states that there may be some differences depending on taxes and processing and all of that. But you can, as a patient, order a Dutch test off of the website, and it's going to be more expensive. And the reason for that is because at Dutch, we want to make sure that if you're going to buy the test, that's totally fine, but you also want to be able to interpret the test. And it's really important to have somebody on board that knows what the Dutch test is, because it's got a lot of information. It's really great information, but it can be very complex. And so we encourage you to be with a provider, to order through that provider so they can walk you through all of that information and help you with that treatment plan and moving forward. So that's why you'll see some differences if you go on the website to say like, hey, just on my own, I want to buy this. That's great. But we would love for you to get with a provider first so that you have a team that knows how to utilize this information and use it to your benefit.
Okay,
So
got
if
it.
they were to order it through you, is there an extra cost for the consult, let's call it?
And that's a good question. So when you have a provider that will walk you through that, there probably will be a cost associated with a visit to review all of that. Absolutely.
Well, so this is not a do-it-yourself interpretation either. I mean, I think that's really clear with all the different factors that you guys are looking at and the metabolites and how, one thing correlates with another. So you really need that professional guidance on how to interpret the results.
Yes, I mean, if you're going to get the best out of your testing, it is ideal to have a provider that can help walk you through that, or even kind of direct you in where to go with regard to treatment and how to approach treatment with all of that information.
Okay.
So let me ask you another question along with that, because people are listening to the show with you. So if someone wanted to get a Dutch test through you, is that something that you offer as a one-off, or is this a process that they need to go through?
It's going to be a little bit of a process, mostly because in the state of Oregon, we have specific, and that's where I'm at in Portland, Oregon. We have very specific guidelines for in-state, out-of-state. Now, if you're in Oregon, you can always reach out to me as a provider or any other providers. But if you're outside of Oregon, at the Dutch test, we have a long list of resources for providers that are available that we know understand the Dutch, use the Dutch test, and can utilize treatments as a resource. So if you have somebody that's, in California or Texas or anywhere like that that wants to do the Dutch testing, is interested in that, definitely call Dutch Test, because we have a list of people, because this is not our first rodeo. So we know that there are lots of people, if you're interested in it, let's get you plugged in so that we can get you taken care of.
Well, I know so many people in our community, say things like, my hormones feel totally out of whack. I'm, my thyroid and then my other hormones, I don't know what's going on, and I can't lose weight and I can't this. And, there's a lot of frustration and people feeling left in the dark about what's going on hormonally in our bodies, especially some of the hormonal complexities that we have as women. So who do you recommend Dutch testing for?
And that's a great question, because I feel like there's a big umbrella, right? Like even if you go onto Dr. Google, low thyroid symptoms, and like all of these things come up. And so I feel like the Dutch test fills a good hole of when you go and get testing done, because you have all of these symptoms. I'm tired. I'm not sleeping well. I'm not waking refreshed. I'm super stressed and I've been stressed for a while. Or you're in that place where your hormones are changing, right? Like your cycles are different, or your PMS is different. Your mood is different. Your reactivity, your body's ability to like have resiliency towards things that are happening, right? Like your patience may not be as much as it was before. That filter is maybe not quite as thick as it used to be. And you're just not feeling like you have the same capacity to do things that you could before. This is your test. And anytime you have that question of, well, I think it could be thyroid related, you always want to look at cortisol. So thyroid and adrenals are BFFs. They walk hand in hand all day long. And so you can't look at one without looking at the other. You want to be able to look and assess both of those. So if you've had a change, or even if it's been a longer standing thing of fatigue or sleep issues, your cycle is changing, where things are happening that you're just like, it just feels different. But you go in to see, a doctor and they're like, well, I ran all the tests. Everything is good. Everything looks within normal ranges. Conventional medicine is really good at letting you know, well, this is a disease state or not. And you're either going to fall into one or the other. But it doesn't do a great job of that gray area. And I feel like the Dutch testing can fall into that gray area where it's like, okay, maybe conventionally speaking, we don't have a lot of tools to evaluate that or even treat that. But this is where functional medicine really shines, because it can look in that gray area and say, well, actually, when I look at your cortisol, or when I look at your thyroid, or all of these together, which would be most optimal, this is where I see, we can make some adjustments and we can make some changes to help you feel better.
Can you tell us a little bit about what some of those adjustments and changes might look like? Is it lifestyle? Is it, excuse me, are you, adding in hormone, or is it other supplements? What does it look like?
That's a great question. And I think it depends on the scale, right? So it depends on where you're at with regard to symptoms and how your test results look. And I think like baseline foundation, we always want to look at diet and lifestyle. So lifestyle being, what are you exposed to? How is your sleep wake cycle? That's going to make a big difference with stress response, and which is also, thyroid function too. And what you put in your body. So what you're intentionally putting in your body, right? Like food, liquid, water, those kinds of things, as well as what you may not intentionally be putting in your body, what you're exposed to environmentally. So those diet and lifestyle factors are going to be a huge foundation. And then in the world of functional medicine, depending on your practitioner, we may be able to look at certain amino acids, nutritional therapy like vitamins and nutrients, and any kind of adaptogens like herbs. When we think of adaptogens, we think more along this line of herbs or botanical medicine. Those can be very strong and powerful when looking at treatment. But sometimes, depending on where you're at, you may also need hormone therapy, whether it's bioidentical hormone therapy for estrogen, progesterone, testosterone, or even thyroid function, right? So there's a big scale of what is available. And I think that the different modalities available are also quite wide. So you have a lot of choices depending on what may work or what may not work for you.
Okay. Yeah. This sounds so amazing. I'm just like, I want it.
It's so much information where it's like, oh my gosh, it's like raining information. And you're like, yes, this is amazing. And then it like all the puzzle pieces fall. And then you're like, okay, now what do I do with all of this?
Right.
Yes.
Yeah. Can you share with us about what you see with the thyroid patients you work with and how it can really help us as thyroid patients specifically?
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. Well, again, anytime you're evaluating thyroid, we will also want to evaluate adrenal function. And when we're looking at one of the things that has actually been shown in research is as cortisol increases, your TSH increases, which means your thyroid function is not doing as well. Because that TSH, which is that marker for that brain to thyroid communication, right? So that TSH goes from the brain to your little thyroid gland and lets your thyroid gland know, I need more or less thyroid hormone in the body. When cortisol increases, that TSH increase is trying to tell your thyroid, like, oh, we're probably going to need more thyroid hormone to deal with this stress. So the TSH also increases. So we want to be able to look at, once we have that information for thyroid, okay, here's all of our thyroid information. We also want to be able to look at cortisol to see how cortisol is affecting that. Because the other consideration is, it's not like our levels just kind of like are there, right? Like they change and adjust based on what's been happening with your life, short-term and long-term. So we want to see, what is the cortisol doing? How is your body responding to that stress? And how is your body managing that stress? And that cortisol needs the support of the thyroid, right? Like if one is not doing its job, the other one has to make up for it. So we want to make sure that we're evaluating those and looking at those equally. And when we look at long-term stress, and even so, short-term stress, like our acute response to a rise in cortisol, let's say. So for example, you have something stressful happening, your body will heighten everything, right? Like it increases blood pressure so that you can manage whatever stress it is. It increases brain focus. It increases the release of glucose into your system so you have the energy to deal with that stress. Mm-hmm. Once that becomes longer term, right, then we have elevated blood pressure, we have elevated blood glucose levels. And cortisol, a lot of times when we have a rise in cortisol, you can see a rise in estrogen. And estrogen also influences your thyroid function. So we're looking at cortisol, estrogen, and thyroid, right? Like we want to know what all of those are doing together because they can influence each other in that way. So estrogen can sometimes compete for thyroid receptors, and that can also confuse thyroid, right? So we want to see what's happening with estrogen and how is it affecting thyroid, what's happening with cortisol and how is it affecting thyroid. And we can see different patterns when we look at cortisol. Like there are certain patterns with the Dutch test that may implicate low thyroid function. There are other patterns with the cortisol presentation on the Dutch test that would implicate high thyroid or hyperthyroid function. So that's where we want to look at not just that cortisol picture, but also thyroid to see how is the body handling all of this and how is the body hanging in there with all of this.
Oh, well, and I mean, I feel like before the pandemic even started, so many of us were already living this super stressful, booked, constantly go, go, go lifestyle. It's just modern life. And then on top of that, I mean, I just was reading, another one of our contributors yesterday contributed to an article in Forbes, and it was saying how 1 in 2 people right now is dealing with depression and anxiety.
Yes.
This stress is real and having very real impacts on our overall health. And, what you're describing with that, like, have you been stressed out for a long time? Are you starting to feel like it's taking a toll? Do you have less patience? I know I am like so easily startled right now. It's crazy. My family's like, you've always been easy to startle, but it's gotten way worse. And they're like, they have fun with it. It is not fun for me.
Yeah. I can imagine.
Jumpy, and so many people in our community reporting sleep issues and weight changes, appetite changes, energy changes, all this stuff. So it would be so amazing just to get that complete picture. And I think that's when people really have those hormonal, they feel like something's going on hormonally. What we really want is that complete picture. So we're so glad to know about this option, Dr. Debbie. We really appreciate how, clear you made all that. So to understand what this is, what it does, and how it can help us. So thank you so much.
Absolutely. And also to remind people that stress is not like, whether it is perceived or real, your body has that response, right? Like your cortisol doesn't know if you're thinking about something or you're doing something. It's still going to have that response. And a lot of people will say, well, oh, I've been stressed like this for a while, or, oh, it's a good stress. Your body doesn't have like a good bucket that it puts cortisol in, right? Like it's just there or not. And so even if it's a good stress or, my body's been like this, when we do testing, we can see, well, even though this has been your normal for 10 years, what is the effect that it's having on your body? Mm-hmm. It's really important to see that, because a lot of people kind of write that off like, oh, well, I'm just a single mom working 70 hours a week. Like, it's just been like that.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, well, let's see what your body tells us. Like, what's the story that your body's telling us about how you're responding to that? As much as I understand that that's your situation and that may or may not change, we still need to see what we can do to support you in that, right? Because we also want to make sure that you can keep your head above water.
Yeah.
One of the big things about thyroid and adrenal function is your adrenal glands become your second ovaries when you go through menopause.
That's right.
So,
right.
yes. So if your adrenal glands are just worried about, like, we're running from a saber-toothed tiger, it's not going to care about hot flashes, night sweats, libido. Nope. It's like, I don't care, lady. We're running from the saber-toothed tiger, right? So we want to make sure that our adrenal evaluation and support is there. Otherwise, menopause is not going to be as fun for you. Like, it's really going to be a challenge. And, the thyroid also responds to that. So we want to make sure that we're looking at all of those components.
Such empowering information. Mm-hmm. Before we sign off, do you have a few takeaways for the listeners today?
Yeah, absolutely. I think one of the big things, whether we're looking at thyroid health, adrenal health, just in general, sleep. Sleep is going to be really, really important. So making sure that you're making sleep a priority, that's going to be huge. And evaluating thyroid also means evaluating cortisol and your stress response. They go hand in hand. You don't want to ignore one. You want to look at the whole picture. And two, if you ever feel like the last one, if you ever feel like anything is off, listen to your body. You live in it 24 hours a day. Don't let anybody turn you away from, like, oh, it's normal. Oh, it's normal. Like, if you don't feel like you're normal, keep finding that person that's going to listen to you. You will find that person. Keep finding that person that's going to listen to you. Definitely, because that's what you need.
Awesome. Good advice.
Okay. Very good.
Well, thank you so much for being here with us today, Dr. Debbie.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited for when you guys do your Dutch tests.
Me too. For our listeners, you can find Dr. Debbie at dutchtest.com by looking at the practitioners listed on the site. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you all for joining us for another episode of Thyroid Refresh TV, where we give you the inspiration and information you need to live thyroid healthy. To receive a free Thyroid Thrivers grocery guide, you can visit thyroidrefresh.com. And to learn more about our new crash course, the Thyroid 30 Tune-Up, visit thyroidrefresh.com/tune-up. You do have the power to heal, and we have the tools.
Yes, we do. And if you've enjoyed this podcast, please leave us a review on iTunes. It would absolutely make our day. We so appreciate your listenership and definitely your support. We're Dana and Jenny, wishing you the best of health. See you next time, guys.
See you next time.